this episode of Therapy Bites Art Lab.
Hey T-Ballers, welcome to the episode today. We are privileged to have Dr. Victor Manzo on an episode called The Psychology and Spirituality of the Subconscious. Ooh, spooky, spooky stuff. And Victor, it's so exciting to have him here today because he is a actual professional at de-pretzelizing children who have turned themselves into pretzels. That's a funny way of saying he's a pediatric chiropractor, but we'll get into that next. You guys join us.
Welcome to Therapy Bites Art Lab, where Dr. Heath and his special guests share real-life stories of helping and healing, fresh from the actual therapy couch, while taking a bite out of common counseling missteps and misconceptions. And now, here's Heath and the T-Ball team.
Dr. Vic, thank you for being here today. We're going to jump right into the episode on the psychology of spirituality and the subconscious. Kind of tell us what you do and how you came from being a pediatric chiropractor, de-pretzelizing children, into what you do now in your career.
Yeah, I've always been fascinated about the mind, and when I was going through chiropractic school, it was an interesting experience because in the first year to year and a half, we studied just like medical doctors do, and that kind of was not what my impression was or my expectations were. And so I want to understand deeper elements to healing. So I started to also, outside of school, I became a Reiki master trainer. I started learning energy healing and different techniques. I learned about 10 to 12 different ones. And I wanted, in that journey though, what I didn't expect to learn was the mind, consciousness, quantum physics, a lot of ancient truths, and how things just work at a level that's you used the term spooky and that element about life. And but then when I got out of chiropractic school, I started going into business, and I got so headstrong, right? I wanted to really thrive in my business. I wanted to make an impact and a change, and it was one of those things where it became one of those elements that I was like, okay, I'm going to do everything that the business world tells me. I'm going to do everything that self-help and the personal development tells me. So reading 80 to 120 books a year, grinding like crazy, hustling, all the words that they tell you to do. And 5 years later, hit my financial peak, but exhausted, fatigue, burnout every 4 to 6 months, and very unsatisfied. I almost looked at leaving the profession because I was like, this just feels like an uphill battle. This is not what I want to have for myself. And then I went back to old stuff that I learned and knew, mindset, neuroscience, and all that other stuff. And I started to apply my life a little differently. I said, if I'm the creator of my life, and if I define success, and if I define it, and I'm very crystal clear on that, then I should experience that in some way, shape, or form. And so I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go and do everything that I know that I was taught before, and just going to let go and trust. And what ended up happening we took a hit financially on purpose because we changed the direction of our practice and how it was run. And then from there, a little over a year later, we rebounded right back to our financial peak. I was working 50% less, never had burnout again. And I started to understand deeper levels of the mindset, more on the quantum world, and understanding how to apply what are the main things I need to focus on. And after that experience, I started to go, you know what? Entrepreneurs need to learn this. People need to learn this, and so do entrepreneurs. And so I started out with entrepreneurs and business owners, and I started to do coaching on that element as like a side hustle. And then after a few years, my wife and I decided we wanted to leave Illinois and move to Tennessee. And so when that happened, we ended up letting the practice go, and I went full-time into coaching, which just happened this year.
Amazing. That's amazing. Well, what part of Tennessee do you live in?
I'm in Knoxville.
Knoxville. I love Knoxville. I was born and bred in Nashville, Tennessee, not too far from Knoxville, but I love going through Knoxville on our way to Gatlinburg in the Smoky Mountains. What a beautiful city that is. Well, it sounds like such just a simple thing. The question is, why doesn't everyone do the same thing? I mean, why, if it's that easy, why doesn't everyone just join in and doing it? What do you think are some of the hurdles that tend to get in people's way?
Themselves at the end of the day. I mean, it's one of the things where if we're talking about what holds people back to like achieve success, or is that kind of what you're going with the question in that realm?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we get in our own ways, but there's a lot of stuff that we don't realize. I mean, the subconscious mind, but there's also limiting beliefs that are built into that, and they're unconsciously we're unaware of them. And there's also other things that play a role: our upbringing, the environment we grew up in, the state of the affairs of where the world was at the time. These all play a role on our development, and it becomes a point where, at least for me, this happened to me, where I had so many limiting beliefs on financial wealth, that it was I had to go through a process of my first couple of years in business. I had to go through bankruptcy to realize how many of those I had and how it caused my life. And when I started to tap into that element and then start to realize, okay, what are the programs, or I call them codes? What are the codes of my life that I'm living by that I may be aware of? And then what are the ones that I'm not? Because when I see a pattern show up, if there's something that constantly happens and I'm not breaking through, or I'm not figuring out how to solve that, usually I'm like, okay, there's got to be something in my past, conditioning wise, in my mind, subconscious somewhere, that is allowing, that is somewhere in that conditioning. And then when I take time to go back and reflect, and there's all these things that I kind of share on how to do that, where maybe, if we get triggered by something, there may be something there, or if we see a pattern, there's something there. And I always tell my clients, like, you don't have to go back and know the exact time frame. Some people need that, some don't, and it's up to the individual. Like for me, I'm the type of person where it's like I can just go, okay, I have that limiting belief, great, I'm going to change that to an empowering belief and move forward. But we get in our own way in so many. That's one element. I think another element too, though, is just the conditioning of the world and what we think success is or life is. What success is or how we should do to get to that point. And a lot of people don't realize that when we're following so much advice, and this was me, that you get caught up in their world and you're not really living your truth in your world and how you want to create your world. And I think sometimes when we can just understand to learn to be more authentic with ourselves and what we want, be clear with it, then all of a sudden that can create a huge shift and change in our life. But a lot of people don't do that.
I see that on social media. People actually these days are going to social media thinking it is some type of roadmap to success if you could follow the pathway or suggestions of some influencer who's only an influencer because they got paid for somebody to smear foundation and makeup on their face. And now they know how to live life and how to tell everybody else how to live life, And do you find that people are taking such advice from all the wrong sources?
I think so, in a lot of ways. You get a lot of people now, like when COVID happened, so many coaches came out, and there's so many of them now. There's mindset coaches or these types of coaches. Everyone's a life coach and all this stuff. And it's one of those things where, there's a difference when those who have walked the path and literally have, not only know the information. Like my spiritual teacher used to tell me this. She was like, when at 24, she's like, so much stuff. Like you're very intelligent, very well ahead of your time. She goes, but the thing about you that you're going to have to learn is that you don't have wisdom yet. And I was like, excuse me? I'm like, what I know is wisdom. and little did I know at 24. And she's like, let me just explain. She's like, you have to understand wisdom comes from knowledge and experiences. And she's like, the thing you don't have a lot of yet, you have a ton of experiences from your childhood, growing up, what you went through. She's like, but you don't have the other part of that. And she goes, if you can understand that, that's going to help you expand in your life in so many ways. And I wish I took her advice to the T at that point in my life. It wasn't until like 6-7 years later when I started to, where I'm like, you know what, maybe she's right. Maybe I just got to let the experiences just show up and then address them and handle them and let the wisdom come. So that, some people say it's like you embodied it. You do that. A lot of people just study things and read things on the internet now, and then they'll just go, okay, that's what that is. Okay. Like when it comes to mindset, right? I'm a mindset coach, and I'm always like, that term has been so watered down because some people are like, well, mindset, yeah, you have a scarcity mindset and you have an abundant mindset. You have a fixed and a growth and this and that. And I'm not saying those aren't true. They are, but mindset's a little bit different in that element. And so I think the a lot of the advice sometimes that's out there is not really, and I could be wrong, but from my feeling and what I see, it doesn't come from that embodiment perspective. Really, like, I have walked the path. I understand that I've been there. Here's what it is. Instead of just, here's a course I put together or here I'm going to coach you on these things that I created for XYZ.
I agree. I think that knowledge is a collection of facts and wisdom is proper deployment or use of those facts or that knowledge.
And Dr. Vic, in your experience, you've been talking a lot about mindset, which, here at the Art Lab, it actually stands for accurate, realistic thinking and life-affirming beliefs. I know in our practice, we've noticed a lot of people put too much focus on their emotions and what they're feeling in the moment instead of, what they're telling themselves. What has your experience been with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's true. Like the emotions are just a reactions of the thoughts in some ways, right? And
Right.
so what's that inner dialogue? What's that inner critic? What's the thing that's going on in that, the mind, or how do they view something? I mean, perspective is everything. And, it's so amazing in the work I do. I'm always telling my clients, if I can just shift your perspective, I could change your world. Or you shift your perspective, you'll change your world. Because it's one of those things where we see things from a different layer or a different angle, and then that opens up a whole new experience, a whole new way of looking at things, which is going to create a whole different emotional response. Because, like, for an example, when an event happens to us, we have two options. You can probably argue and say there's more, but literally, if we just generalize everything, it comes down to two things. You can see it as a positive or a negative in your life. And however you view that, that's going to dictate the whole rest of everything down that road. It's going to be, if you see it negative, then your mind's going to have to now all of a sudden show you all the negatives because you believe this was a negative event for you. Or you can have the opposite experience and think that this was something that's going to serve you or be great for you in some way, shape, or form. Even if other people may see it as like bad or not good. And then your mind will, if you truly believe it, your mind will follow that and all of a sudden say, here you go. Here's in your awareness now, the positive, what you have going on here. And then the positive emotions follow. And then all of a sudden that can kind of shift those gears.
We teach people a similar thing, that you can either view it as a catastrophe or an opportunity. And secondly, the more you define experience one way or the other, the more your brain seeks out either opportunities or catastrophes. And I'm sure you've seen people in your work that they're really just master catastrophizers. There's really no difficult situation that through their thought processes they can't make worse.
100%. I mean, and I love that. And it's one of those things where, was I going to go with this? So I was going to get into some neuroscience, but it's amazing and how that, as simple as that is, it's so overlooked, and some people fight and say, well, no, that's just it's that woo-woo stuff out there, or you're getting a lot out there. And I'm like, quantum physics says how you see something and what it becomes. Your world will shape around what you see. And then that whole reticular activating system in the brain is going to, what you deem valuable is going to start raising more in your consciousness. And it doesn't mean that it was never there before, right? If you view something negative and you shift it positive, then you're like, oh my God, look, that's there. I can't believe that was there. And it's like, it's always been there. It's just filtering that stuff out and only letting you see what you believe or what you value to be what's valuable to you to allow into your consciousness.
Oh, okay. And I'm glad that you brought up the RES. I mean, the reticular activating system really has to be told what to focus on. Those of you out there that struggle with ADD, ADHD, that is all based in a defect in the RAS, the reticular activating system, as Dr. Vic talked about. The good news there is that, as we say, everything is figure-outable, which means that everything is trainable. With the brain's potential and capability of what we now know is neuroplasticity, which is really a no term 30 years ago. And Michael Merznick started publishing about that, a great neuroscientist, and he would actually put quotation marks. It starts to air quotes. I'm doing air quotes here, but he would put quotation marks around neuroplasticity, expecting criticism, which he really received because people thought it was so much ridiculosity, until it was shown to be that's exactly how the brain works. The more you tell your brain to focus on catastrophe, you're literally training your brain to be a master catastrophizer. On the other side, if you train your brain to look for, well, you look at things as opportunities. I mean, it might not be what you prefer, but lack of a desired or preferred outcome I think it's a very bad idea to let that begin in your life to equal catastrophe. And I think, Dr. Vic, what you do is you teach people how to focus more on success.
100%. I mean, I wrote a book about this called The Walk in the Dark, and it's all about the darkness we face in life and how it's our greatest ally. And in the whole entire book, the whole concept is just how to see what shows up in your life as something that's there to serve you. And I walk through how you can elevate your consciousness to not get stuck into maybe fear or the worry or whatever that may show up. And it's so in the book concept, it's one of those things where that like we can turn that, and that's the power that we have. That's one thing I love to talk to a lot of my clients about and like to share a lot, is how powerful we really are, how we really can create our own life. And it's really just it's simple, but it takes practice, because even with the brain, like chiropractors, when the research was coming out about how the brain's really plastic, it can constantly change, it's not fixed and stuck anymore. We were like, yep, we've been trying to say that, we just, we didn't have the research to show it, but 1900 they said nervous system's tone can change over repetition of time. But it's one of those things where Hebb's law is another great way of explaining what you're talking about, going to the whole concept of like, if we keep seeing things negative, we're going to rewire that brain. And Hebb's law states when nerves fire together, wire together. So the way I kind of explain Hebb's law, and I used to share this with patients, and especially with my clients I do, is I'm like, just think of it as like an expressway. And every time you fire that pathway, we're slowly widening the expressway. And what happens is your nervous system runs off the path of least resistance. So it's going to go to whatever the widest expressway is as many times as possible. It'll go to wherever's easiest path. And so the more we retrain fire these pathways up, the more we start to make these connections, then the wider that path's going to be, which makes it easier for you to do that. And so it's just a matter of time. And that's why I work with try to tell my clients a lot, you got to be patient in this work, because as more I don't know if you guys notice this or not, but the more our attention span is decreasing, the harder it's becoming to change our neurology. And one of my mentors told me, I was at a seminar about 3-4 years ago, and we were talking about habits and shifts and changes, and I was just talking to him about care plans with kids and stuff, and what I would do as a frequency. And I was sharing some of the neurology of why I do it this way. And he's like, you're going to have to probably extend it a little bit more. And I was like, what? And he goes, it takes about 84 days on average now because of our attention span. And I was like, can you please send me that research? And of course, he's always researching. He's like, if I remember, send me an email. I'll get one of my students to try to get that over to you. And I was like, okay, I know what that means. It means you're too busy, but eventually I'm going to find that research one of these days. But yeah.
Oh, you're exactly right about that. Of course, I love SpongeBob. No offense to the SpongeBob folks. Squidward is from locally. Squidward is actually from Jonesboro, where the art lab is located, and I love SpongeBob. But we have developed a SpongeBob length attention span, and I think we've lost a lot of resilience. One of the things that you're talking about there with the Hebb's law is what fires together, wires together, kind of indicates a need for practice. And what we practice, the brain actually does more of it. It's just what direction of practice. There's social memes out there about the differences in motivation and discipline. And some people, some big name influencers, gosh, I think Jocko Willink says this, and I love his stuff, but I disagree with this. He's just off base neurologically on this, that motivation doesn't matter. Well, discipline is built on the back of motivation, and motivation is built on the back of our thinking. And one of the things that I've heard from Special Forces guys, I used to work at the VA and did my clinical rotations there, is they would have this thing, a slogan, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Well, you can apply that to learning these skills that you're talking about, Dr. Vic, about focusing our thought on success-oriented thinking. And it's not going to be fast. It's not going to be overnight. But if you will do it slowly, it becomes a smooth manner of thinking, and then it becomes automatic. It becomes fast. Same way you started learning how to drive. You weren't very fast at deciding, well, to see right foot on brake, right foot on gas, and now you do it and you never think about it because it functions at the level of implicit processing, and you can program your brain. But you talked about how fast that can happen, and that's a great point, because what's the book Malcolm Gladwell has on tipping point, that when he researched some of the biggest names in our world, including Steve Jobs and even Mozart, Beethoven, some of the tech guys of this era also, the number is about 10,000 hours. Mastery of anything is going to take about 10,000 hours. I spoke of Michael Mersnick and his colleague Paula Talal. They found that repetition-wise, it's in the neighborhood of, I think it's been a while, 60 to 70,000 repetitions or something like that. And people might hear that and think, oh my goodness, who has time for that? The answer is, well, your brain does, because humans practice things out loud in their environment, but they can also practice just intentionally thinking about it, playing through it in their mind, and also during sleep. We practice this circuitry that we lay down during the day, we practice it in sleep. And so it's not fast, but it is certain, I think. Do you find that people get very frustrated with, I don't know, just not being very patient and wanting to move ahead too quickly?
Yeah, 100%. I see it often. And I always tell my clients when I'm working with them, when we work on something like this, that's been, maybe it's a limiting belief, right? And I'm like, understand this is going to take some time. Well, I heard that so-and-so I saw on a TikTok video that was like, yeah, they got it and their whole life changed and nothing ever happened. I said, that doesn't usually happen. I'm not saying it doesn't. I don't want to rule it out, because I've made changes like in an instant, and then but I'm very disciplined, and I'll be like, and I had it in my mind, like, this is where I'm going, and that's it. But I'm like, from a neurological perspective, that doesn't happen. Like, you have to reprogram the brain and do that and be patient with it. And I always tell them, you have to do 90 days of this, just at least 90 days, just to start to build it into a habit. But how about, one of the things I share with a lot of my clients, and I've been, this fascinated me back when 15 years ago, the power of visualization. Now, being a chiropractor and studying the body more than any other doctor does, you can visualize in your mind. I think I don't know if you were talking about this or not, but you can visualize in your mind. They did studies on like working out, and then they did studies of those who work out, and then a person who just visualized working out, and then someone who didn't do anything. And in the study, they found out that the one who worked out, well, you would assume they would gain muscle strength and so forth, and they did. But the second group was the puzzling one, because they just missed the same gains that the ones that did the workout when the ones who just did visualization. And of course, the ones who didn't do anything didn't get any results. But they've done this in free throw shooting and basketball players, piano players, and learning their neuroplasticity and how the pathways were developing, even with one who played and didn't play. And that's something that fascinates me. Now, I'm trying to say, I'm in my head, no research has ever been done. And if I had millions and millions of dollars, I would have done the research. I'm like, what if you do visualization and the process? And then would that speed it up? Can we? Now, I don't know if we can. I don't have any research on that to know, but understanding just to the listeners, like how even just using visualization, and it's a tool I use in my coaching, can also help you in that process to build up those pathways.
I completely agree. And there's actually an interesting anecdotal story about that, about a Vietnam veteran who came home from being a prisoner of war. And I'm not a golfer, I won't use the proper terminology, but he shot one heck of a game, and I got whatever, a couple of eagles or something. And he told the story that while he was a POW, he played, I think, 4 18-hole golf courses every day during his captivity. Now, wait a minute, you're a POW? They got an 18-hole golf course in the POW camp? No, he played every game inside of his mind, and he knew every step on his home golf course, and he would, I started to say painstakingly, but nothing could be more painstaking than being a POW, but he would actually go through every step, every hole, every green in his mind, such that it really hardwired and coded that in his brain. And he was an excellent golfer by the time he got out. And I think that's the big thing. People don't visualize. They don't take time to visualize. And then they don't take time to take time. I like to remind people that if you're on therapy session number 10, and or 8, good round number, that's 2 months maybe if you're attending therapy weekly. Let's do the math. You've struggled with this difficulty for 3 decades. Well, let's see. Let's divide 2 by 360 and see what percentage of time you've worked on rewiring it. Why would you expect to rewire in 2 months some circuitry that you have devoted to developing for a decade? I mean, that doesn't make sense. I mean, that'd be like coming to me as a golf coach, and maybe I'm Tiger Woods' golf coach. Maybe I'm that good of a golf coach, and you expect to be Tiger Woods in what, 8 training sessions? I mean, I think that part of visualization must be what's realistic and what's not realistic. And people often in our line of business sabotage themselves thinking there's such a thing as a single session cure.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
what do you find, what length of time do you find it takes people to really get the hang of this stuff?
Usually within about 90 days, they get into a rhythm, right? Because it takes, in the first month, they're still trying to figure things out. They're in their head a lot with it. By the second month, they're starting to get into a rhythm to where it's like, okay, I kind of understand this, or I'm starting to, like, let's say it's a limiting belief and they don't think, like, it's like a low self-worth, and they have this story that they tell themselves. So, and then by the third month, then it's like they're starting to get, I wouldn't say they have it perfect. I mean, everyone's different too on that element, but it's usually around the third month. It's like after 90 days, they're kind of like, I kind of have it now. I'm not saying I'm perfect. And I'm like, don't worry about perfection. It still happens to me. And I've been doing this for 15 plus years. But it's one of the things where it's easier to get into rhythm. Like when I have someone try to meditate, I tell them 90 days, same meditation for 90 days. And that's my rule. I'm like, you got to do that for 90 days. And they look and they go, the same thing. Yes, the same thing. Why, man? Why not? I'm like, because the first 30 days, you're going to hate me. You're going to be swearing at me. You're going to be, and you may not tell me, but you're going to be saying it in your head because you're going to be so frustrated and so aggravated. I said, by the second month, you're going to start to like, maybe be able to like, go, okay, I didn't realize how many thoughts were going on in my head, but I'm starting not to pay attention to them a little bit. By the third month, roughly close to around that, anywhere from 70 to 90, 100 days, all of a sudden, like, man, I found that like centeredness, like the thoughts are there, but I just totally didn't even pay attention. And it doesn't mean they're doing it perfectly, but they're just, at that, they got a rhythm where like, okay, I finally kind of got a gauge on this a little bit.
And then it's a bit like a eureka moment, I would suppose.
Oh yeah. And it's fun. It's amazing some of the things that will come out. I know when I'm jumping on a coaching call and the client's like really excited. Let's say I was recommending meditation and they've been doing the work, and then all of a sudden they're like, Doc, I finally got to that. I call it the bliss state. And they're like, I got to that bliss state. I'm like, well, tell me what your bliss state is, because mine's probably a little different than yours. And then they'll go through it and they'll explain it. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds about right. And like, that was so great. Like I was disconnected and I was just like really centered and I was calm and this and that. And I was like, sweet. And then of course, what happens with us is with our mind is we always think the same experience is going to happen the next time. Then they go meditate and then they don't get that experience and they're frustrated again. And I'm like, leave the expectations at the door. Just, you never know what's going to show up. And again, I always like to use myself as an example. I've been meditating for over 15 years. And it's one of those things where I tell them, I still have those moments from time to time where I go and meditate and I can't sit and focus because my mind's getting too pulled. It happens to us all. But you just know it's like it's a wild horse. You just hold it, pull it back, pull the reins back, and just get it back to center.
Wow. I like that wild horse analogy. Hey, I wanted to ask you, Dr. Vic, what are your thoughts on self-fulfilling prophecy when you're working with people?
A self-fulfilling prophecy. I'm going blank right now as I think about that. But, working with give me an example of self-fulfilling prophecy. Really
kind
quick.
of like, do we create our own reality?
There we go.
Whatever we think, like
Yeah.
if we're thinking we're going to fail, we're headed there.
We are the creators of our life. How we see something is what it's going to be. I mean, I have a quote that I say, there's no rules to life except the ones you create. And so a lot of that quote comes from a lot of it from quantum physics and some neuroscience. RAS is one of those. But you can, if you think you're not good at something or you don't think you're going to be well at something, and you really believe that, there is nothing that's going to change that. I mean, even as a chiropractor, I used to tell my patients, if you don't believe that you can heal and you don't have the power that your body's designed to heal, and you don't believe that at all, like in the deepest fabric of yourself, you don't, because I'm not talking about skeptics, because skeptics are actually believers. They just don't realize it. But I'm talking about people. And I would tell them that too. I'm like, they'll be like, I'm a skeptic. I love it when a patient comes in, they'll be like, I'm a skeptic. And I'll be going, okay, please explain. And they'll tell me. And I'm like, okay, great. I'm like, you're going to be my best patient. And they just look at me like I'm crazy. And I go, I'm like, understand, if you're truly a skeptic and you don't believe this stuff at all, and you don't have to believe it's science, there's facts. But I'm like, if you don't want to believe this, then you wouldn't be here right now. So there's some part of you that believes this in some way, shape, or form. And they sometimes will get mad at me. I'm like, I'm just sharing. But, if you don't, but I used to tell patients, if you do not believe, I had one patient who thought he knew healing better than I did. And I was like, there's no comparison. I go, I don't know healing. I just know a very small amount of what the body can do. I go, majority of the doctors out in the world only know 1 to 10% of what the body does. So I'm like, understand that we don't, I go, unless you know something more than I am all ears to learn. I don't care who it is. And, but I kept telling him, I'm like, your thought process on healing in thinking that you know what you need to heal is actually being your biggest block. And what I'm doing for you is not going to do anything until we get past that point. And so that's how powerful our mind is. And just look at placebo, nocebo effects. The placebo, something good comes out of something from nothing, just changing, a sugar pill. They've even done studies with this where they cut open somebody's knee, didn't do anything, stitched it back up. They had them in a study. And then all of a sudden the patient's like, my knee pain's gone. Wow, that surgery worked. And then, of course, they were told, we didn't do anything. Or nocebo is the other way, where you think something is going to be the most detrimental thing into you in the world, and it's not, but because you think it is, you're going to have those effects.
Individual psychological concepts are very different animals from one another. And while they are often readily observable in the wild, the Therapy Bites Art Lab Zoo affords us a unique opportunity to study them in a safe and controlled environment. Welcome to the Therapy Bites Art Lab Creature Feature. Oh, good heavens!
Ooh, hey there, T-Ballers. Welcome to this week's Creature Feature. My name is Sarah, and I am currently on the hunt for the mind-reading gnat. Now, the mind-reading gnat is a negative automatic thought, and it thinks that it knows what everybody else is thinking. So if somebody gives it an angry scowl, it thinks it knows that person is angry with them and that it's done something wrong. And if you see me looking around, those of you on video, it's because I think I hear him coming, and I want to make sure I don't get hit by him. So, everybody duck! Oh, there he is. Right here, this little critter. I'm going to be careful not to get too close. This right here is the mind-reading gnat. And as I said before earlier, he thinks he knows what he's thinking. But a lesson that we can learn from this little gnat is that we also do not know what other people are thinking. So if you think that you know what other people are thinking, you probably have an infestation of this little guy in your brain. So what you can do is you can practice accurate, realistic thinking instead to exterminate this little guy. But first, let me take care of him. I want to make sure that he doesn't get away, because he's an excellent specimen for study. So let's see if we can just... Oh, there we go. Got him. But anytime you have the mind-reading gnat in your mind, just remember, practice arty, accurate, realistic thinking. Catch you in the next episode, guys. Enjoy the rest of this episode. Bye!
Thank you for joining us for the Therapy Bites Art Lab Creature Feature.
You're listening to Therapy Bites Art Lab, bite-sized therapy for your brain with Dr. Heath and the T-Ball team. The best advice on the net. No copay required.
You're slipping beneath the cushions of your bobble-headed psychotherapist's couch, leaving behind empty, echoing, cushy, comforting, pseudo-psychological claptrap, moving into a deeper dimension of your own mind, where distorted thinking, hurting, hopelessness, and regret evaporate into clarity, healing, renewed hope, and newfound resilience. That's the podcast sign up ahead. Your next stop, Therapy Bites Psych Secrets.
Hey T-Ballers, welcome to another tidbit of Psych Secrets. It's Doc Heath here with Psychotherapy Duck. And what does Psychotherapy Duck say about some of the psychotherapy nonsense going on out there? He says quack quack. And what we're talking about today are psych secrets related to diagnosis. Have you ever had a clinician just take your word for a diagnosis? You say you're depressed and that becomes your diagnosis. You say that you have anxiety and that becomes your diagnosis. You say you have trauma and they just label you with trauma or PTSD. Well, think about it. What sense would it make for you to go to a cardiologist and the cardiologist take your word for your diagnosis, or your pulmonologist to take your word for the diagnosis, or even your podiatrist to take your word for a diagnosis? No, your clinician is supposed to be trained with all the requisite skills for diagnosis and not lay that off on you by being lazy. Psychotherapy Duck also wants you to know, quack, quack, that diagnosis is not required to get beneficial therapy. That having a label doesn't necessarily help you heal from a certain pathology. What does? What does is what is driving the pathology, which is a whole series of underlying pathological, distorted thoughts and beliefs. Focus on those, not the diagnostic label, and you'll see your life grow healthier, quicker than you might think. Doc Heath and Psychotherapy Duck out. Quack, quack.
Once again, Doc Heath rips the cushions from the couch, dishes the dirt, lets the cat out of the bag, uncorks the bottle, letting the genie escape, and blows the lid off of another of the universe's psych secrets.
Here's Heath and the T-Ball team.
In my consulting career, we would have, of course, we did surveys, and we would review med rounds and medical charts, medication administration records, and we would have patients who would chase down the med cart looking for their Albucal. And what would they take Albucal for? It was one of the most successful medications that was administered in the day. This is back in the 90s. And patients who couldn't sleep, Albucal, sleep was perfect. They would have anxiety, a little Albucal, anxiety goes away. Depression, yep. Constipation, yep, that too. And Albucal was what? Albucal was placebo spelled backward. But people really believed in it and swore by it and chased the med cart down. Because as you point out, and as you say that, there's a research study, I don't remember the citation, I'll try to put it up in the show notes, I'll hunt that down, it's been several years ago. But people experiencing chronic pain were given an opiate, one group. One group was given a placebo, one group was given marijuana in some form, and one group was provided hypnotherapy. Guess which group did the worst in the study? Those taking the opiates.
I was going to say the opiates.
The ones that did the best, the ones that did the best were the people that used the hypnotherapy. That was the top, and then I think marijuana and the placebo were kind of close runners, but I'll try to look that up, make sure that's accurate. But I want to point out that the most powerful drug we have is encased in the vault of our own skull, and that is our brain, and that's the whole research behind, or the whole point of the research behind pain and gateways. That if you sever the spinal cord, you'll feel nothing in your toes, and that means that whatever you're experiencing in your toe now is simply information that is being relayed through a neuronal path, through a neurological pathway to the neurons in the skull. And if it's just information, then we get to decide how to interpret that information, and we get to decide how much of the spigot to turn on and off related to that information. And it is possible to turn that spigot of information nearly, if not all the way off. And I think that's a fabulous thing. We're kind of getting into the area of neuroscience, if not some quantum physics there. So tell us some spooky stuff that you run into in the realm of quantum physics as it relates to us human beings.
Oh man, there is so much stuff. I mean, just the element on just, when we talked about the power of visualization, right? And just that aspect of how like muscle growth can happen just through visualizing. Or you're talking about the golf story, or we're talking about basketball and shooting free throws. It's like you don't practice at all, but yet at the same token, you can visualize that and all of a sudden it become your reality. And that to me, I think is kind of bizarre because I love quantum physics, because scientists, they're so like in a box logical, right? This is what I'm looking for and that's all I'm looking for. And what I love about quantum physicists is they'll be like, yep, we don't know why this is going on this way, but we just understand that that's how this works, and that's the end of this. And I love that because I'm like, they're very open. It's kind of weird. They're open minded, but they're not open minded, but they are, because they're like, yeah, we're just trying to understand the spookiness of life, and it's just the craziest thing. But even when it comes to like when I'm working with clients all the time. When I can get them into a state where I work a lot on getting out of your mind and getting into your heart, I just call it that. But it's really just getting back into this beautiful technological system that we have that we just don't harness and use and connect with as much as we used to. And it can be a guidance system. It can guide us into where our vision is and taking action and knowing, does this action align with where I want to go, how to heal and all these other things. And when they really step into that quantum aspect and really focus on their vibe, right, their consciousness level or their vibe, or in quantum physics, they call it the quanta, their energy. It's amazing what shows up in their life. I mean, I have clients, they'll have bizarre things come out of nowhere, like something happens to somebody nearby, but it benefited them and it helped them hit the goal of where they wanted to get to. And they've been in business for like 15, 20 some years. Actually, I had 3 clients happen this year where the one was in business for 19, one was in for 22 and 23. So it's not a new business. And they've always wanted to hit a certain threshold. And I said, well, let's just focus on the vibe. We're going to work on some things. And I go, we're going to work on your vision, get clear with that. Then we're going to do all this other stuff. And all of a sudden, I remember, never forget, two out of 3 hit the same month in August, and one was in September, of just breaking records. And they look and they're like, how the heck did this all work out? How did this happen? Like, and then like, well, just because of that, that's why I got there. And I'm like, no, it's not. It's because it's where you're vibing at. And wherever your conscious level is what you're going to create in your life. But there's a lot of stuff in the quantum realms that's just really interesting. Like, I don't know if you guys ever, I think it's a Strogan something's cat.
Schrodinger's cat.
Yeah.
We have Schrodinger's cat in the art lab. We should have put him up on our mic. He's a googly-eyed little thing. Yeah.
It's always, I love that because that's an interesting concept, and it's an interesting way of looking at something. Like, it's not, is it dead? Is it alive? How do we know? And so forth. But there's a lot in the realms of, like quantum entanglement, how all things are entangled. And when it comes to like healing from an emotional standpoint, you don't just heal yourself and help and transcend, but it also channels to everything before and after. And how they figure these things out, it's mind blowing to me. But it's cool to read the studies, and then I'm like, okay, how do I understand that study even deeper? And then I'll have somebody who's a little smarter than me explain that in a way where I'm like, okay,
well, one of the things I love about it, and mentioning Schrodinger's cat is, and for those of you that don't know the story, that just the quick backstory of Schrodinger, Erwin Schrodinger, and his cat, which is really a thought experiment, is imagine a cat in a box. Now look, I'm a cat lover. Don't go out and put a cat in a box. That is animal abuse. Don't do that. Be friendly to your cats. But this imaginary cat, who, they don't care because they're just imaginary. Imagine the cat in the box, and there's a radioactive pellet, and there's some uncertainty as to when the pellet is dropped. And you don't know when the pellet's dropped. And it's based in some mechanism. It's been a while since I read this story and told this story. I know I'm getting some of it wrong. Some of you physicists out there that are, doing cartwheels saying, hey, Doc Heath, he should stay in his own lane in neuropsychology. But there's some uncertainty to it. But the point of it is the cat is in a quantum state. It is both dead and alive at the same time until observation occurs. And at the point that observation occurs, a state is chosen, and at that point and that point only, based in observation, the cat will either be dead or alive. Now, I know it may be a bit of a stretch, but in psychology, it works in a similar way, that things will turn out to be inevitably how you have decided for them to be. Now, that doesn't mean if you've decided you're going to wake up tomorrow morning and there's a pallet of gold brick in your yard. That's not what I'm talking about. And I don't think that that's what Dr. Vic's talking about either. What we are talking about is you are the Michelangelo of your reality. It is your brain that is sculpting your reality. And there is lots of research about how mindset affects sports performance. And another one along those lines, and this is, we're along the lines of Schrodinger's cat, and that thought experiment is the double slit experiment, which actually did happen. And it's often misunderstood, and I'm not saying I understand it completely, but enough just to kind of maybe not get it too wrong, is that when electrons were shot from a electron gun, I'm doing air quotes here for those listening, when electrons are shot with an electron gun at gold foil, they made a pattern. But then when there was a separating mechanism, a funnel, so to speak, a dual funnel, and a single electron was shot, it had to pick a path. Is it going to go down the left funnel, or is it going to go down the right funnel? Pop quiz, what kind of pattern would you expect? Well, you would kind of expect still a equal distribution, an equal distribution of electrons to the left, and equal distribution of electrons to the right. You would expect two different patterns, about 50% one way, 50% the other. But guess what was found? And here's why Einstein called quantum physics spooky action at a distance. He didn't like quantum physics a whole lot, I think, because as a classical physicist, he was still trying to come to understand it, and you have to be willing to not understand things to grasp, I think, quantum physics. And what they found was that the electron did what? It didn't split. It chose both pathways simultaneously. Lacking observation, all possibilities will occur. Lacking observation. When it was measured, that is observed, only at that point was a pathway chosen. Now, think the connotations that in our lives. Only when we decide how things are going to turn out do things come congealed and laser focused in that direction. I'm going to fail my algebra test becomes you fail your algebra test. But why would you tell yourself that? I'm going to fail at business becomes, as Debbie talked about, the self-fulfilling prophecy. You then fail at business. And Vic, I think that, like me, a lot of your work is actually challenging what we call in the art lab this sabotaging thinking. Clinically we call it cognitive distortions, and I like how you put some of that. What are some of the other top cognitive distortions that you find people run into?
I think one of the biggest one that comes up is just a lack of self-worth, and thinking that they're not worthy of something. They want to strive for it, they want to go there, but when we get down to having that real deep conversation and really just connect and let's get real with this, they'll be like, I just don't feel that I can achieve that. Why? And then we go through this kind of work of there's a limiting belief there, and we want to discover what that is and to uncover that, so then we can work through that and change that into a powering belief and create a new statement. And then of course go through what we've been talking about, like reprogramming the brain and so forth. But and I think that's another one too that comes up a lot, which is shocking. I mean, there's a fear of failure, which is okay, that's a no-brainer. Fear of success. Am I going to lose myself in the process? What's going to happen? Trying to control what that's going to look like instead of just, having that fear of, is it going to get out of control? Is this going to be this? How am I going to lose? Am I going to be able to all these different things that people come up with. And it's one of those things that, again, coming back to, then I always be like, okay, why would you have a fear? What are you worried about? The spotlight, this, that, whatever. Everyone has a different reason. But those are, I would say, the two big ones that come up when I'm working with clients and trying to, I always say, I'm trying to clear the ceiling. We solve this, then we open up that ceiling. There's no resistance anymore. Now we can actually soar to that next level or level up to where you want to go. And so I'd say those are the two main ones that I see often.
And I agree. I think in our clinical work, we see some of the same things.
We've talked a lot about imagery and self-fulfilling prophecy, and when I think imagery, it's imagining something in your mind. And I've also heard some people talk about, clients and just friends, people talk about how kids nowadays with so much technology are having a hard time with imagination and they're imagining. Do you think that's going to affect later on when if they're trying to work on things, that guided imagery and working in that aspect of life. And I hope I worded that well, because I've been throwing it around.
No, you did. I think it is. I think it's going to play a huge role because kids, what are kids really designed to do, when they're first developing and so forth, is to go play. 3-4 years old, their left brain's not even fully developed. So there's not a lot of logic. So there's a lot of imagination and creativity, and that's for them to explore the world in their own imagination. This is why I love this question, because this is what I tell my clients to become. I tell them my goal for me working with you is to get you back to a 3-4-year-old, not the maturity side though, but everything else that comes with it, because they're awesome. They're at the peak imagination state. 3-4 years old, they're just, I just became a dad for about 4 months ago, and it's one of those things where I'm very present with my daughter where she is.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But I joke with my daughter because I'm a big kid. That's why I love working with kids so much. I tell them I cannot wait till she says, "Daddy, come on over. I want to have a tea party," or whatever she wants. And I have to go into her world and really tune into her imagination. The problem with when we were, besides blue light and all this stuff and what the imaging does to the brain, seeing all this stuff, but what they do is it constructs them to only see something a certain way and doesn't let them to be able to step out and tap and learn about their creativity and learn how to really get into that element more and express it. It's a part of expression that the brain has to go through. And yet I think that's going to affect in a lot of ways that kind of process. And I think there's other things that affect creativity and imagination and so forth. When it comes, I used to say, well, I won't get into that, but it's one of the things where that kind of concept, I think there's other things that play a role, but this is also something that is big. And unfortunately it is, we're just barely starting to see the effects of it, especially during COVID and all the screen time. Kids were being on screens for 7-8 hours straight a day, 5 days a week through that process.
Yes, I agree. I think it's something that our brains were not engineered for. Mm-hmm. And just to switch lanes to bring in the spiritual component, what part do you believe that spirituality plays in mindset and the psychology of the subconscious and mindset success?
I think it's everything, because spirituality to me is, fulfillment, and fulfillment is choosing what you want to experience for yourself. We're all here to have a piece of this pie called the human life, right? And we're all here to express it in the way that we want to express it in our world and our meaning of what it becomes. Like my world is completely different to your world and everyone else's world. We're all unique. Quantum mechanics principle, Pauli exclusion principle states that, there's no two things in the universe that are identical. And so when it comes to, this is why I like a lot of my work, and I really appreciate being a chiropractor in the beginning, because chiropractic is a very individual approach. It's not a cookie cutter system. I'm not saying there isn't chiropractors out there that may practice that, but in the process of chiropractic, it's an individual approach, helping the individual for what they need in their process. And you guys understand this very well with the work you guys do. Mm-hmm. And so it's really the aspect of how to unleash that and allow for that individual to lead to a life of fulfillment. How with my clients, I'm always telling them, I want to help you discover what your soul's gifts are. And I have no problem calling it a soul's gift. Some people, we get into life purpose, soul's purpose. Why are you here? Why are you literally a human being on this earth right now? And they'll look at me, business clients, especially the very left brain dominant individuals, just look at me and say, I hired you to help me double my profits. Why the heck are you talking about my soul's purpose? I said, just trust the process. You'll understand it later. Right now, this is the time. It's like Mr. Miyagi, just up, down, right?
Wax on, wax off.
Wax on, wax off, right? Don't ask questions. We'll get to that part later. Just do this now. It'll all make sense later. And it's funny. The ones who trust me, they're like, okay. And then they get into it. And then later on, they're like, I see why you had me do that. I'm like, yeah, it makes sense now, doesn't it? If I told you it, then you would have been too much in your left brain. I only give you a little bit to work on. But I think spirituality is everything. And unfortunately, in today's world, I think there's an attack on it in some way, because if you look at the world, the things now with all the conditioning and social media and all this stuff is trying to get us to all be the same in some way, right? In some way, shape, or form, instead of going to let us really express who we really are. And I think when it comes to that, really expressing of who we really are in the way that we want to express it, I think that really allows for individualism, which allows for us to learn more about ourselves and then really gain the most experiences out of life, which, again, it's a spiritual process.
I completely agree, and I think I tell people, and we've had a few memes or social media posts of our own that say that you, Y-O-U, occupy a you, Y-O-U spaced place in the universe, and you're meant to be there. And I mean, Mr. Rogers used to say something along the lines of, in the entire universe, there never ever has been someone like you, and there is not now someone like you, and there will never again be something like you. That you, the you that makes you you, is meant to be. You are literally meant by the universe, God, if you will, to occupy this space. And I think that's a very spiritual thing. I mean, it's something that all the existentialist philosophers struggle with. Jean-Paul Sartre, one of my favorite philosophers, though I believe he was an atheist, Albert Camus, and of course my very favorite, Soren Kierkegaard, and then based on his philosophy, Viktor Frankl. They struggle with existence. And so the most spiritual thing that I think that I've ever done for myself, I'll tell on myself, as they say in the South, is come to understand that I am literally meant to be here. I do not need anyone's permission to be here. I do not need anyone's permission to continue to be here. I am literally meant to be here. And I think if those listening will come to terms with that purpose number one is realizing that you're meant to be here, then yes, I think the rest will come much more easily. So I congratulate you, Doc, for pointing that out to your clients. Is let's talk about purpose, because there's not enough talk about purpose. And as you say, in social media, the purpose seems to be you need to be like somebody else. And I think the very worst thing you can do is to be like somebody else. For goodness sakes, don't be like me. I think, and my wife would testify to this, that one Doc Heath is plenty. I think so too. I mean, what an awful world it would be if I met myself everywhere I went. I don't think we would get along well. Thank goodness there's only one of me. But there must be one of me. There shouldn't be more, but there shouldn't be less. And for you guys out there, there shouldn't be more, and there shouldn't be less. Any party comments before we close out the show for the day, Dr. Vic?
No, I mean, the one thing I'll just add to what you're saying is just that it all comes down to how unique we really are, right? I shared the quantum mechanic principle, but there's also even just I love bringing biology and trying to find other things in our own gut, in our colon itself. There is at least 500 to 1,000 bacteria that you have in there that is unique to you, and no other species has it. So that's how unique we really are. And so I always say, if you find it in one element of life and you see it in other aspects, there's got to be some truth to it. So, just be, it's one of the things that, enjoy and express, just understand how powerful and how much, the last part is to understand you were needed here also. That's why you're here. And
Absolutely.
So in not want, it wasn't out of a want. Nothing's ever created out of a want. The universe, the body, nothing creates anything out of wants. It creates everything out of a need. And so just understanding that should hopefully create some inspiration to, want to take your life or whatever it is to the next level, or just, aspire to whatever your dreams may be.
And yes, thank you very much. I really so much appreciate you being here. Thank you, listeners, for being here. Thank you, watchers on YouTube, for being here. Share this out to somebody that might need a injection of purpose into their life, an injection of understanding that they have meaning. It is intrinsic to them. They are meant to be here. And as we always say, we first engineer our thoughts, then our thoughts engineer our lives. You guys go out there and engineer some good ones, and catch us on the next Therapy Bites Art Lab. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Hey, T-Ballers. Thanks so much for being with us today. If we brought value to your day, show us some love by leaving your positive feedback and inviting some friends to listen in and join the T-Ball team. Next time on Therapy Bites Art Lab.
Join us on the Therapy Bites Art Lab podcast today, where we will talk about the struggle juggle, the psychology of becoming a change champion, and we will have a world-class guest, Di Manuel, who is a dad. He is a person who loves talking about dating his wife. I'm a big fan of that also. He is a lifestyle business mentor and coach, a high performance coach. Join us for the episode.
Government legal gobbledygook. Therapy Bites is not intended as a diagnostic or as an alternative to professional clinical treatment. Resources and advice are for information and entertainment purposes only. Brought to you by someone saying things you don't like? Tape that nagging loudmouth shut. Government-approved speech tape. Gas tape. Now available at your local hardware store. Therapy Bites Art Lab is not an approved, endorsed, authorized, butt-kissing affiliate of the United States Special Offense Assessment Police. SOAP for short. Warning. Consumption of Therapy Bites Art Lab content by Kool-Aid drinking, stinking, thinking, social media, pseudo-psychological pushing, wacky woke, anti-free speech, mumbo-jumbo advocates may cause spontaneous internal skull combustion, stomach discomfort, and/or laxative effects. Allergy warning. Therapy Bites is manufactured in a facility that challenges nutty distortions, processes nuggets of accurate, realistic thinking, and life-affirming beliefs. This is the audio version of the legal fine print. Why are you still listening to this when you can catch the next great episode of Therapy Bites Art Lab with a good friend or family member? Really? Are you still there? This is getting silly. Move on to the next psychologically thrilling episode of the best advice on the net. No copay required.
Me eat copay.
Yeah, with Dr. Heath and the T-Ball team. Go ahead, don't be podgoraphobic. Scoot, scoot, scoot. On to the next episode.